Fishing out of a kayak is totally different than fishing from bank or from a boat. That's why today I had a few consideration points that you should think about before buying rods and reels for kayak fishing. Hi, my name's Ethan. I'm a Discount Tackle brand ambassador, and I have been fishing out of numerous different kayaks for over 6 years. One thing that always stays the same no matter what kayak I'm in is the fact that if you cater your gear appropriately, you're going to catch more bass on the water and have a better time out there. Now, I've got 3 major consideration points that I want to share with you today, but before I do, I wanted to re-emphasize the fact that personal preference is always a big deal when selecting fishing gear. The things that I'm going to show you today are absolutely my personal preferences. That being said, I believe they truly will help you out on the water. So let's get right into it. The first thing that you absolutely should consider when buying a rod and reel for kayak fishing is your rod length. I'm not going to tell you always to go shorter on rods, and I'm certainly not going to tell you always go longer on rods. In fact, I'm going to tell you a little bit of both. So what I mean by that is, depending on what you're throwing, you may want to change up your rod length just a little bit to ensure that you're having a better time out there on the kayak. So for example, when it comes to moving baits and reaction baits like lipless crankbaits, spinner baits, chatter baits, so on and so forth, I actually like to shorten down my rod a little bit. The main reason is because when you're sitting on a kayak, there's not a lot of a gap between you and the water. You're seated like what, 6-12 inches above the water, so you really don't have much of a gap between your rod tip and the water. A lot of times when you're working a spinner bait, you've got your rod tip pointed low, you might be making low casts underneath overhanging trees, and so by shortening your rod tip, you're going to allow yourself to not only work your bait more effectively, but additionally you're going to be able to make more precise casts. So in a normal environment, I might choose like a 7-foot rod, but in a kayak, I'm probably going to opt for a 6'6" to a 6'10". Now on the flip side, when it comes to slower moving baits, I'm actually going to go completely opposite here. Normally I might throw a 7-foot rod for my traditional jigs, Texas rigs, tubes, whatever, but because I'm in a kayak and I know that when I set the hook hard, my kayak's actually going to move a little bit, I actually like to add 1 to 3 inches. So I might go with something more like this. This is a 7'1". I've also got a 7'3" that I really like, and that allows me just to pick up a little bit more line, and that offsets the fact that my kayak might move pretty heavily on a big hook set. So I guess basically the rule of thumb for rod length suggestions is, if you're pointing it down and working the bait a lot, shorten it up a little bit. And if you're pointing your rod tip up and setting the hook powerfully on a slow moving bait, you might actually add a couple inches of length. One other thing to consider is a lot of people actually like to buy rods with a little bit shorter rod butts when in a kayak, because obviously you have a PFD, you have very limited space, and so they like to have a little bit shorter rod butt. Personally, I don't find that to be an issue. I actually like just buying standard rods. Okay, so rod length was my number 1 consideration point. Well, my number 2 consideration point is actually reel speed. Honestly, I don't have a major suggestion here. The only thing that I did want to point out is that on a lot of baits, I actually like to increase my reel speed a little bit. And again, that just comes down to the fact that your kayak is moving. And so when I'm throwing something like a crankbait, you might often get suggestions to throw like a 5-to-1 reel or a really slow reel. Well, what I've found is that I actually don't land near as many fish using slow reels. And so I like to up it to maybe a 6-3-to-1 or even a 7-1-to-1. And that allows me to set the hook and keep the fish pinned by reeling fast and picking up more line. Okay, that's 2 consideration points. Well, I've got another one for you. The last thing that I would say that you really need to consider when it comes to buying rods and reels for kayak fishing is versatility. Most kayak anglers don't take more than 5 rod and reels in their boat at any given time, and that means that you're going to have to be able to use your rod and reels for more than just one thing. This rod and reel right here for me is absolutely my workhorse. This is a 6'10" medium heavy Daiwa Tatula. It's got a 6'3-to-1 Tatula Elite on there, and I've got it spooled up with 14-pound fluorocarbon. I can throw jerk baits, I can throw crankbaits, I can throw spinner baits, I can throw chatterbaits, I can throw swim jigs, you get the point. I'm honestly considering buying a couple more of this rod and reel right here just because I use it so much. The point is that it might be a little silly to have a designated rod for every type of fishing technique. The reality is you just can't bring them all with you. You don't have a rod locker, and so it's probably smart to actually consolidate. Lately, I've actually been doing that myself. I've sold a bunch of old stuff and I've downsized my equipment, but I've bought stuff that I feel like is absolutely going to work harder for me. The other thing with versatility is the fact that I personally still like bank fishing. I like going out in my buddy's boat, and I'm sure a lot of you do too. So I would assume that you're going to want to be able to use these for more than just kayak fishing. And that's why, again, I don't mess with rod butt length. I don't mess with getting too technically specific for kayak fishing. I just make those slight alterations. And what happens is I'm great out there in the kayak, but I've still got the opportunity to catch tons of fish from bank or in a boat. Overall, those were my 3 main consideration points for buying rods and reels for kayak fishing. If you have any questions, feel free to drop a comment below. Otherwise, I'm going to have some gear linked in the description below that you can check out as well. And last but not least, make sure to wear your PFD out there while you're kayak fishing. Safety should always be your #1 concern. Tight lines. We'll catch you next time.